planning strategy envisages high density development along major transport corridors and around transport nodes. It's a fairly key component, but it brings with it the need to deal with high levels of external noise, primarily traffic noise. Now, it's known that noise, external noise, can have significant health impacts that arise from the prolonged exposure to high noise levels. Because of this, and because the new policies for the planning strategy are envisaging high density development, we want the high density development to actually be a desirable place for people to live. So we need to deal with the external noise issue. To do this, we've come up with a suite of planning and building policies that aim to achieve that objective. The result is that we have a proposed noise and air emissions overlay to go into council development plans, and we have a new minister specification dealing with the construction requirements for the control of external sound. The scope of this presentation is to look at, first of all, what triggers the minister specification, then once triggered, how it applies, then the use of deemed to satisfy and alternative solutions, and finally, to help you through it all, we have design guidelines. So first of all, looking at the integrated planning and building approach. As I said, there's a new noise overlay to go into council development plans. These maps will indicate the sound sources that are to be taken into account. That will be major roads, rail lines, and mixed-use mixed-use areas and some entertainment venues. The mapping then triggers the use of the minister specification at the building rules assessment stage, and it's at that time that the minister specification will detail the extent of construction requirements. They are to be applied to Class 1s, 2s, 3s, 4 and 9C buildings. So that is all buildings under the building code that are residential. Okay, what are the sound sources that we're looking for? I mentioned it's primarily around transport corridors. So that means we have what we call Type A, Type B and Type R roads. The differences between the Type A and Type B roads, which is the ones that you'll get in the metropolitan area, are basically traffic volume and whether they're a freight route or not. So a Type A road has more than 50,000 vehicles per day and on a freight route, and a Type B road has between 25 and 49,000 vehicles per day, and it is designated as a strategic road. The Type R roads are basically freight roads in a rural area. As well as the roads, we also have rail lines, that's both train and tram. Mixed use areas where there's going to be a combination of noise generating activities and around entertainment venues. At the moment we have one development plan that has such an overlay in it, and that's the overlay in the City of Charles Sturt development plan for the Bowden development. So on the screen you can see we have the Bowden development. Within that area it's a mixed use area, so the whole of that area is relevant. Also mapped on that plan, you'll see in green are the adjoining roads that are relevant, and in the dotted lines you can see there is both the rail line and the tram line extension to the entertainment centre. They are also indicated, so they are all noise sources that need to be taken into account. Additionally, if there are any dwellings that are located within 65 metres of an existing entertainment facility, then there will be specific requirements. So there's an example of how these overlays will fit. The entertainment venues are basically the Class 9B assembly buildings. If it's designated as part of the mixed-use areas, there is a 9B building in there and it's licensed to provide live entertainment, then it needs to be taken into account. And if the new development is proposed to be within 65 metres of that entertainment venue, then the building becomes what we call a Category 5, and that's the highest level in the noise categories. The lowest level is a Category 1, and if you're within a mixed-use area, then no matter where you are, Category 1 will apply. And that's basically in recognition that because of the breadth of activities occurring in that mixed-use area, the background noise levels are going to be higher than normal. We can now look more specifically at the Minister Specification, that's SA 78B, and look at how that works. Okay, the purpose of the new Minister Specification is to protect the occupants of residential buildings from those noise impacts from road and rail movements, the mixed-use background noise levels and entertainment venues. It's a performance-based document and there are performance measures. So we're basically looking for a maximum allowable noise level of 30 dBA in bedrooms and allowable up to 40 dBA in any other habitable room, so any other living room or the like. But what this particular requirement does, it also allows you to average the performance of the building. So you can comply with an average level of 30 dBA in the bedrooms and 35 dBA in the habitable rooms. And that's simply recognising that when you do your window and wall treatments, you'll have some, they can't be any greater than the maximum level, but because most of the construction will be standardised, the average is going to be somewhat lower. And we'll see why that will occur in just a moment. So as I said, it's a performance-based document. It's based very much on the formatting of the BCA that you're all familiar with. So there are deemed to satisfy requirements, and that means that if you follow standard treatments for window glazing, door sills, ceiling insulation, window treatments and the like, then you can follow the prescriptive deemed to satisfy provisions. Or you can use an alternative solution, and that means getting an acoustic consultant to report on what needs to be done. Those sorts of alternative solutions are probably going to be very useful in complex developments and particularly multi-storey apartments, where it's going to pay to get an acoustic report on what is the most cost-effective option. But for normal construction, most people would probably go for the deemed to satisfy requirement. So in following the Minister's specification, there are 4 steps. The first is to determine what the designated sound sources are, the ones that are relevant, and you get those from the overlay. Having established those sound sources, the next step is to then determine what is the measurement of the separation distance between the sound source and the new building. That will then tell you what the sound exposure category is that you need to know about and that you need to apply to the building. And lastly, the last step is, of course, to decide with that information whether you are going to go for a deemed to satisfy solution or for an alternative solution. This slide and the next series of slides show you how this impacts on the number of buildings that are relevant to the sound source that you're considering. This road, for instance, is a Type A road, and it's at 60 kilometres an hour. Now, road speed is actually quite important in determining the impact of the noise levels. And in this case, as you can see, any building, any residential building that's within that 100 metres from the road will be captured to some extent. Here's another Type A road. Now this road is at 100 kilometres an hour, considerably faster. And look what happens to the separation distances. For Category 1, we're going out to 200 metres. That's 200 metres from the road. Just about all of the distances have doubled. So just a change in the road speed has a significant impact on the number of buildings that are captured and their construction category that they'll need to comply with. Something different again. This one is for a train line. Now, first of all, there is no Category 4, so the higher category hasn't been triggered. This is because the general noise levels are much lower. And the total breadth that we're looking at is now only 55 metres from the rail line. Quite a difference from the previous examples. So rail lines actually have a very short corridor where you need to look at sound attenuation. And just looking at that particular slide, you'll see that really it only captures the first row of houses directly adjacent to the rail line. So that gives you an idea of the distances that are involved. The next thing to note is how you actually measure those distances and whether there is actual exposure. The golden rule is there must be a direct line of sight. For a road, the location of the sound source is taken as being 3 metres inside the road corridor. That means it basically allows for a standard footpath or whatever, nature strip along the edge of the road and then onto the road proper. If you have a clear line of sight from wherever you are on the facade of the building to that point, then it is exposed. If there isn't a direct line of sight, then there is no exposure. And that's an important point. On this slide, we have an example where there is a road and a rail line and a house. In looking at the requirements for the house, you need to look at the exposure for both the rail line and the road, what that means in terms of separation distance, and what that then means in terms of the construction category that's going to be relevant to the facades. So as you can see, for the facade that's adjacent to the rail line, it's Category 2, whereas the facade that's adjacent to the facing the road, it's Category 3. Here's another example, and this is just a house directly adjacent to a road. The separation distance will change as you move around the house. So the facades that are closest to the road have Category 3, and at the back of the house it's a lower category, lower level of construction, that's Category 2. So you can get a number of different categories that can apply to a particular building. Now whether you choose to do that or not is entirely up to you, that's up to the designer. But what it can mean is that by locating sound sensitive rooms like bedrooms towards the back of the property will actually make it easier for getting the sorts of noise attenuation that you need, and it will be cheaper construction. We've mentioned entertainment venues before. Here's a more detailed example of an entertainment venue. There's an existing entertainment venue on the corner there of a couple of roads. If the new development is within 65 metres of the boundary of that property, then the onus is on the new development to attenuate the noise and not on the entertainment venue. It's an important point because it's basically acknowledging that the entertainment venue is already there and is generating noise, and that as a new development coming in, the onus is on you to make sure that the noise is dealt with in your new development. For those sorts of venues and those sorts of situations, because they are so specific to a particular venue and to a particular situation, you will need an acoustic consultant to do that. There are no deemed to satisfies. So that's basically the Minister's specification. To help you through this, and a lot can be done to mitigate the impacts of these new provisions through getting the basic design right. So the designer needs to be very well aware of what these provisions mean and how they can minimise the impact of external noise by some simple noise treatments. So we produced a guideline. It takes you through some basic design techniques in terms of planning and building design and orientation, and from some of those examples you see, hopefully you can see how orientation to the road or to the sound source is very important. We then provide some construction techniques. These are examples, just examples, of how you can provide, how you can apply the provisions of the Minister's specification to give you typical wall, ceiling, insulation, window construction. So there are some examples for each of the categories to help you through that. And lastly, there are some case studies of some typical mixed-use developments and how the different provisions might be applied in those areas. Some of the design techniques, there are plenty of examples in the guidelines, but they include things like land buffers, where you might locate private and communal open space, the building layout itself and its orientation, things like podiums and balconies, how they can impact. And from the diagram on the screen you can see how a podium with the residential portion set back can significantly impact on sound. And lastly, of course, there's the possibility of external noise walls, mounds and screens, and they're particularly useful if you're doing a new land division where you can actually provide some protection to an entire suburb, if you like, rather than dealing with each building individually. So there are lots of techniques in the guidelines to help you through. So lastly, the new provisions came in on the 1st of March, so they are in effect right now. But importantly, they do not get triggered, and this was what you need to remember, they do not get triggered unless there is a noise overlay map in the council development plan. Now that's going to be difficult, we know, to keep tabs of which development plans have been altered. We will endeavour to keep an up-to-date list of the plans that have been altered with the overlays and keep that on our website. So if you can't get the information from the council, then you should be able to get it from our website. It'll operate very similar to the way in which we deal with bushfire protection areas, and most of you would be familiar with that. So with that, thank you very much, and if you have any questions, contact the Building Policy Unit and we'll endeavour to help you answer any questions that you have. Thank you.